Welcome to Holistic Assessments, a better way to assess learning. I'm Mark Hussey.
I'm Allison Huff, and we teach at Front Range Community College. And today we're going to try and convince you that holistic assessment is better than using points. So what do we mean by holistic assessment? Basically, it's a way of using narrative and evaluative criteria in order to convey to students how they're doing in the course instead of relying on what we'll argue are meaningless, if not detrimental points.
You mean pointless classes.
Yes. And so what does it look like in the classroom? We're going to take a second to show you, or 5 minutes to show you what it looks like in a philosophy logic course. And then we'll also take a little tour of a English course as well. In our grade book, it may look a little different than some of your other classes. Instead of using points for our course, we use holistic assessment and narrative feedback. And so what that will look like is that I will write to you on each assignment that you do, or most of the assignments that you do, and offer some guidance, some feedback, a way for you to check in to see how you're doing, to know which areas may need strengthening, and maybe point you to some supplemental information, more practice problems, more resources. Or I'll also be able to point out where your strengths are, where I think you're excelling, and that sort of thing. So this is a sample of what it could look like. So over on the left, you'll see the assignment itself. And then in the middle is where you'll see just kind of the overall, was it on time, that sort of thing. But to the right is the more important piece, where you'll see my feedback to you. So here's where on the homework you did, you can see some specific comments that I'll leave for you, again, to try and let you know how you're doing so that you have a consistent check-in from me, so you can feel like, if you're making progress, if you're on track, if you seem to be slipping, or if you need a little more extra support, that sort of thing. So you'll want to check in the gradebook for that as we go along, and know that there won't be points, but instead there will be things that I say to you. Sometimes you'll see that it may say to consider revising. Here it says on time and complete, but consider revising. So you're always welcome to make revisions to work you've turned in on time, and to continue moving forward. Our goal here is to learn and to work towards those learning outcomes. And so you're welcome to do them as many times as you need. But if you get them in on time for the first time, then I will be able to give you feedback on time. And then we can keep our steady progress with our course. So you'll want to look for that. Another thing to look for is if you see it saying this view inline feedback in the gradebook, that means that I've actually annotated on your document. So I was able to type on it, or circle on it, or write on it in some manner. I've written to you in your document itself. So if and when you see that, you'll want to click it. And when you click it, it will open up your document. So here's a sample again. And some things to note, that I might have, starred some items that were done right. Maybe I've offered some suggestion if you weren't quite getting on the mark there. There are little notes boxes I can leave more detailed comments for you, and that sort of thing. So be sure to look for those inline comments. Again, what that means is that I've annotated a document for you. Okay, so that's for the formative assessments that we'll do along the way. We also have some summative assessments, or you might know them as tests or exams, and we'll have a number of those throughout the semester. But for those, that's where you'll get a snapshot of your progress towards those learning outcomes overall. So the big picture, you'll have, I think we have 4 main checkpoints that we'll do here, that you'll get a chance to see where are you at so far in terms of your progress towards demonstrating your proficiency in those learning outcomes. And so some things to look for there, that again, you'll see the sort of overall picture of where you're at towards the outcomes in general. And then you'll also have some narrative feedback from me. Depending on what I've seen from you so far to that point, I'll give you some feedback that way. And then you'll also want to click here where it says View Graded Rubric, and that will tell you, or that will look like this, where you'll see the outcome for the course, or for the unit. So each of our learning outcomes will be listed there. And then in addition to that, you'll see how I think we are measuring our progress towards those outcomes via that module or that unit. So you'll have some specific things that you'll say, you know, oh, okay, how proficient am I at identifying conclusions so far? And so I'll mark a box here for you to let you know where I think you're at. And then I may also offer some additional feedback. So, you know, if you're kind of on the right track, but maybe you just need a little support with something, I'll try to give you that information there too. So try to make use of this feedback. This will be the key way that you can know where you're at in terms of your grades and performance in the course. And again, kind of seeing where you might want to focus, where you are doing great, and resources that are available to you to move forward. So that is our how our holistic gradebook will look. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Allison, for sharing that. Next is a video introduction to an English course, also using holistic assessments. And the audience here is students in an online asynchronous course with no points. So this is me giving an overview of how that would look in an English course. Hello, and welcome to English 121. As you're getting familiar with the class, you'll likely, when you're reading the syllabus, see the phrase holistic assessments, and you may be noticing that in this class there are no points, which is a very probably different situation than you're used to in either college class or really any type of class. So I wanted to take a few minutes to walk you through how you earn your grade in this class and how your work will be evaluated here. So I do that through a process called holistic assessment. And to introduce you to that concept, I want to have you take a few minutes and respond to the following writing prompt. So I want you to think about one thing that you're good at, and consider, how did you get good at that? What was the process you followed? What did you do to get good at it? And then what level of skill did you accomplish with that thing that you're good at? Have you achieved an advanced skill? Are you proficient? Is that skill something you're still working at? Is it emerging? Or would you say you're somewhere in the developing or perhaps just untested range with that skill? So what I want you to do here is pause the video for a couple of minutes and consider these 3 questions. And then you'll have little answer boxes where you can submit your answers to these questions. So pause the video, take a few minutes. You can handwrite it, or you can type it up right into the answer box for question for each of the writing prompts. Okay, so I would guess that for any of these skills that you selected, or any skill that you have, that the way you got good at it involved some amount of working at it, or doing something, or practicing it. And like any skill, this class is a course in writing, and it's a skill. and it's something that you get good at by working on it and practicing with it. And I like this quote from Terry Doyle. He argues that it is the one who does the work who does the learning. And so this, I think, is a good way of encapsulating my approach to this class. I tried to put you into a situation where you're the one doing most of the work. And my role as an instructor is to help you with evaluating your work, working and thinking of new ways to improve it, trying to offer some new strategies that you might try out. But predominantly, you'll be the one doing the work in the class. Additionally, my approach to teaching comes partly from James Lang, who points out that I, as a teacher, can't fire the synapses in your brains. So if I want you to be learning something, it involves you thinking and you doing. And so what I do with these writing activities is to pose writing prompts, to pose questions, and to try to get you thinking and working through problems in writing yourself. So I'm trying to create an environment that'll help facilitate these connections and give you opportunities to practice and build your skills in this class. So because this is a skill-based class, we need lots of space to write and practice writing and get feedback on it. And so what I tried to do was to think about the skill of writing and break it down into overall kind of categories of what makes a writer effective at writing. And I think I've got it narrowed down to about 4 categories. These aren't perfect, but my hope is that this is what you're going to be learning in this course. So by the end of the semester, you should come away with some level of proficiency or competency, and ideally an advanced level of skill with these learning outcomes. So my hope is that you'll develop an awareness of rhetorical situations, audience purpose, genre, context. I hope you develop a proficiency with writing process and with strategies for writing. I'm also hopeful that you'll build your skills with reading and researching and thinking critically about the things you're reading and researching. And there's also a level of engagement that we'll practice and work on in this class, where we're trying to become familiar with academic norms, genre conventions, and the kind of stylistic choices that writers make when they enter into rhetorical situations. So this is just a brief snippet of what it is we're going to be learning in this class, what it is we'll be practicing. We'll spend a lot more time talking about what each of these learning outcomes mean. We'll have guided writing activities that'll walk you through explaining these and practicing the specific kind of elements of each of these. But we'll keep coming back to these learning outcomes throughout the semester. This is what it is. If you get nothing else out of this class, my hope is that you become proficient in these skills. So what do you need to do in this course in order to practice and develop those skills? I've got kind of 3 categories of assignments. There's assignments that are primarily for your own practice. You do them in order to practice that skill. You do that in order to practice a new concept or a new strategy. And there's also just participation in the class, because a lot of the ways that you get better at writing involve participating and collaborating with other writers, getting feedback on your writing, giving feedback on other writers' work, and also learning to practice that evaluation of writing in different contexts. So we'll do practice and participation. These writing activities will be a main venue for that. There'll also be discussion boards where you'll be discussing with your classmates. And the other category of work is attempts and drafts. So with those, you're working on an essay and you're working on a writing project, but it's not complete yet. You're just doing your best to complete one stage of the writing process, perhaps an outline, perhaps a bibliography. And by submitting that once or twice a week, that'll give you plenty of time to get feedback and input on your written work as it's progressing towards being a complete and revised essay. And then the last category are the revised essays. And when it comes to showing me that you've become proficient in these learning outcomes, that's where I'm really going to look at these revised essay submissions. So when I read your summary and response essay, I'll be asking myself, how much awareness of rhetorical situations have you demonstrated in writing this essay? Did you employ a writing process and a strategy that effectively produced an essay? Were you reading and researching and thinking critically? Did you engage effectively with academic norms and genre conventions? So these revised essay submissions are the place where I'm really looking for demonstrations of your skill. And these other two grade categories are more you having a chance to practice, attempt those skills, and submit it and get feedback on it. So that's what you do. And then how you earn your grade is at the end of the semester, we'll take a look at all of the work you did all semester in all three of these categories. And we'll take some time, and what I'll do is have you reflect on where your skills have gotten to by the end of the semester. So right now, I'm guessing most incoming students are probably somewhere either emerging or in a non-satisfactory place. That's where you should be. You're taking a college course in order to grow those skills, so that's not something to worry about if you're feeling less than confident about your abilities. The goal of this class is to grow, develop, and practice those skills until we attain at least, I hope, proficient. I think working for an advanced level of skill is awesome, but that's going above and beyond. I think proficient is a really good goal to aim for, and that way if you haven't quite achieved like strong proficiency, then you're still in the emerging level, then you're still in a passing level of work. So that's kind of a rough breakdown of how you earn your grade in this class. And we'll have plenty of time to think and reflect on exactly what these criteria mean. So what does it mean to be a proficient writer? What does it mean to be emerging? What might advanced look like? So in your first writing prompt, when I asked you about a skill that you're good at, you probably have an idea of what is meant by describing yourself as proficient with that skill. You probably would have a pretty good idea of being able to decide that you weren't as good with that skill as you want to be. And so we'll spend time unpacking this and describing what does it look like for a writer to have an emerging level of skill. What would it look like for a writer in a college environment to demonstrate and show proficiency? And so we'll be talking about that. That's how your work will be evaluated. But I wanted to introduce this to you because when grades are determined by points, it's often you get work for coming to class, or you get points for coming to class. You get points for turning something in. And then other times you get points based on how well you did. And so all that really matters here, because there are no points, is the work you're doing and the progress you're making. And we don't make a final determination for your grade until the end of the semester. So at any point in the semester, we can sit down and talk about where your skills are at. But your grade isn't determined until we've had the entire semester to practice and work on those skills. So please let me know if you feel like you're if your skills aren't growing quickly enough, or you're feeling less than confident about where you're at. Let me know and we can talk about how to find additional ways to practice and improve your skills. So for right now, for your second writing prompt, I've got 2 questions, and I'd just like you to take a few minutes to tell me about where you think you're coming into this class at. You aren't expected to be competent just yet, but take about 5 minutes and describe your overall abilities or experience with reading and writing. And do you feel like you're already advanced, proficient, competent? developing, emerging? How would you describe your skills with reading and writing? Take about 5 or 10 minutes and pause and reflect and write your responses into writing prompt 2. Okay, so I'm going to skim over this really quickly. I'll explain this in the second guided writing activity, but I wanted to let you know that we do have a consistent pattern for when we do work and how we make sure that we're working deliberately towards those learning outcomes. So each day of the week, you can kind of see when things are going to be due, when I recommend you work on different assignments and activities, and at the end of each week, we'll usually have a attempt or draft to be submitted. And when there's an essay due, then you won't have one of those attempts due. But I wanted to give you an idea that there's a pretty predictable pace to this class. And just FYI, I usually take Saturdays and Sundays as my days off, and you're free to use them as you see fit. And Mondays are usually my recommended day when you get work turned in, so that Tuesdays I can plan on having your work turned in and I can start giving you feedback on it Tuesday morning. And finally, one last writing prompt. I wanted to refer you to one of my favorite writers, Peter Elbow, where he says, "Meaning is not what you start with, but what you end up with." And so I wanted to kind of remind you that where we're trying to get to is 10 weeks out from where we are right now. So for that second writing prompt, you may not feel super confident about your writing abilities, but I do hope that we end the semester having made a good deal of progress in those learning outcomes. So for right now, take a few minutes and think about what questions you have about either this approach to grading, about the learning outcomes of the course, or how your grades will be determined in this class. Thanks for participating in this video, and I look forward to seeing where you're at and working from there. Thanks. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a sense of sort of how we go about explaining holistic assessment to students. And I think it probably gives you a bit of an idea how we approach our teaching from an outcomes-based, engaged learner standpoint. The quote in there from Terry Doyle, it really wasn't until we dove into active learning or sometimes engaged learning that we started thinking in terms of outcomes as the kind of basis of what it is we're trying to assess in a course. And so from here, I think it's worth kind of clarifying a little bit about what holistic assessment is not.
Right. So there are other types of alternative grading, like grading contracts and standards-based assessment. But what we're looking here is more outcomes being measured and using, again, words and narrative feedback and reflective work from the students in order to provide that assessment wording and to let them know how they are or how they're progressing towards those learning outcomes.
So holistic assessment is not grading. So we are still grading. It's included in there. I don't think it's, at least at our institution, possible to avoid giving a final letter grade. But throughout the semester, the focus is on evaluating and providing feedback to students rather than trying to somehow encapsulate their learning in a numerical value or ranking students.
And so,
so I put together a short argument in which I kind of rant a little bit on why points are harmful to learning.
Okay, we'll show you that video next.
Okay, so I would like to take a minute to attempt to persuade you of a fairly simple and straightforward claim. No one should use points to assess student learning or to assign grades. And I'm tempted to say ever. I think that I've tried to put together a fairly brief list of reasons why, and I'll go through them and try to explain a few of them, but my argument is, I think, pretty straightforward. We've got to stop using points. They're not working, and I think they do more harm than they do any kind of good, if they even do anything good. First, points are inefficient. If you think about it, what we're trying to do when we grade students is give them feedback on their work. And when we tell them, your work has earned 7 out of 10, what we have done is substituted an opportunity for giving feedback on that work and replaced it with a number. So that number then requires interpretation. And then we also need to defend the giving of that number, which we may have just pulled up off the tip of our tongue. So we've given a 7 out of 10. Students don't know what that means. We may have a rubric that justifies it, but what justifies the rubric? And so points are inefficient because we have to take an incredible amount of time and energy developing some type of scheme for awarding points, and we also have to spend time dealing with student complaints in response to those points, when if what we had done at the beginning was simply tell a student what they did well and what they could still work on. And there's no need for a number there, just provide feedback and talk about their work. What the number does is then add confusion to a situation that is already sometimes difficult for students to handle. Points are unclear, vague, and likely meaningless. That 7 out of 10, to you as a thinker, you might have some vague idea that 7 means competent. But have you ever taken the time with your students to discuss what you mean by competent? Did you convey explicitly and clearly what that looks like? Have you unpacked it? Probably not. You just gave a 7 out of 10, and then the student logs into their learning management system, sees they got a 7 out of 10, and says, sweet, I passed. Or, oh no, I'm almost failing. So it might mean two completely different things. The student doesn't know what you mean, the student doesn't know what it means in terms of their grade, and it's all over the place. Points do not accurately measure student learning. There's a couple of reasons for that. Sometimes points are given simply because a student attended class. Sometimes they made an attempt at something and they got points for completion. Sometimes the points are an indicator of how many questions they got right on a test. Sometimes it's just an approximation of the quality of an essay. So they can mean a whole bunch of different things, but how well do they correlate with student learning? So if you've got points for completion, those have probably no correlation with student learning at all, or at best coincidental. If it's based on their score of a test, perhaps they learned it and they aced that test, but 2 days later they forget it all. Can you really say that those points reflected the student's learning? And I think there's another way in which points fail to measure student learning. And that's because they assess student learning at the wrong time. So if you give a student, or we'll say a student comes into the class and they're a hard worker, they're sincerely attempting to grow and develop their skills, but that first essay they turn in, or that first essay they submit, or first test they submit is just terrible. They flunked it. And now they've got a 50% in the class. Well, that 50%, what does that really mean? Let's say they work hard, they make it up, and by the end of the semester they ace their final exam. And given just those two scores, they now have an average of a 75%. But if you've given a comprehensive exam at the end, what is to say that they didn't learn everything in the class? So because we're awarding points for, I think, various different things at the beginning of the class, when students don't really know how to even function in the class yet, they don't know what's going on, they're not oriented. This is especially true in a freshman composition course where they may have had a totally different experience in high school than what they're about to see in college, and so they sometimes struggle at the beginning. And by awarding points at the beginning, we're really harming their performance in the class. And so giving points at the end sort of averages in with what happens at the beginning, and now we've got an average, but not really an accurate representation of learning. Points are often miscalculated or misunderstood. Students don't necessarily know enough math to be able to figure out what it is that a grade means. So if you have your essays are worth 50% of your grade and there's 500 points in that category and it's all weighted down to this, do they know how to figure out that they have 100% of a category that is 50% of their grade? That math is, I think, goes over the heads of many students. Or alternatively, there might be something like a 5-point quiz, and let's say they bomb it, they fail it, they just got a 0 out of 5, and we'll say that there's 1,000 points in the whole semester. That 5-point quiz is basically meaningless in terms of their final grade, but they may think or believe that they are failing the class because of that one quiz. So it signals to students that they're doing really poorly when they may not be. Points undermine student learning and motivation. I've got, I think, a good quote to illustrate this. Grades, the second quote here, grades are the quintessential form of extrinsic motivation. They reward for accomplishment, but they are also threats. If you don't comply in every way, no matter how you feel about anything, you will be dethroned. Yet the fact is, most people are motivated by interest or need, not by arbitrary mandates. So I think what we've got here is that students end up doing work in a class, not because they have any intrinsic motivation to learn or any need to learn, but simply because they're going for an A. And so what you get is an extrinsically motivated, task-oriented student who's pretty much totally alienated from the learning process. And when that happens, points become the primary goal of a class instead of learning. And I think that when that happens, you get students who are more likely to complain, more likely to cause problems, they're less satisfied with the class, and ultimately they're learning less. Possibly even worse, Inoue points out that most writing teachers hate grading. And I don't know if that's true for anybody here, but I agree with this. I don't like grading. And most teachers know intuitively how bad it is for their students' learning. It's a distraction that pulls students away from the real dialogues and discussions about their writing that we want to have. It isn't formative in nature. A grade on a paper is a red herring to most students. That grade distracts from any kind of feedback. It consumes the feedback. It turns the feedback into an explanation of the grade rather than just a stage on the way of learning. Inoue points out that grades are even worse than that. There's a more sinister problem with grading. Grading, because it requires a single dominant standards, is a racist and white supremacist practice. So that's a bold claim, but I think he makes a very important point. That because we're imposing a singular way of interpreting student work that really, I think, is detached from actual learning, we're imposing basically an arbitrary standard on student learning. We're judging them by criteria that are at least very potentially racist in nature. Definitely potentially arbitrary and, I think, disingenuous. So I think what I want you to take away from this argument that I'm making here is simply that we should stop using points as part of the process of assigning grades. There's alternatives that are better and more effective. Inoue points to a grading contract. Others have pointed to standard-based grading, and we're trying to articulate holistic assessments as one more alternative to, I think, a point-based system that needs to go away. And just as an encouragement, there's the reasons why not to use points, but what does it look like when a classroom removes itself and detaches itself from points? Ashley Lamb Sinclair says, I didn't have to worry about converting standards to point values and inputting them into the gradebook. I was talking with Allison just a bit ago about how much time we used to spend converting and discussing numbers when we should have been talking about the type of learning that students would do in a class. We used to argue about percentages rather than learning. And then she goes on, typically my assessment process takes anywhere from a week to a couple of months. Put this up on the screen here. Typically my assessment process takes anywhere from a week to a couple of months, and the pressure along the way from students, parents, and administrators often shifts my focus away from learning and toward frequent inputting of grades. But when grades were put on the back burner, I was freed up to focus on authentic communication of actual learning and growth. My sole focus became the learning of each student and sharing my observations of that learning in the moment. It felt like a revelation. So please, I beg you, stop using points to assess student learning, and I hope that that will feel like a revelation for you as well. Thank you.
Okay, so in addition to why we shouldn't use points, the alternative we're putting forth is to use holistic assessment. And as Mark pointed out, there are other ideas of using contract grading and standards-based grading, but we're arguing that holistic assessment is really the better way to do this. And so I have some reasons there. But in addition to those, I have some feedback from students that I collected over the course of a year. And I think some of what they have to say is super powerful in terms of what impact just this shift from moving from points to narrative and helping encourage that working towards learning instead of trying to amass points, what kind of shift that does for them. So one more video here for us. Another key thing we should consider is what impact this has on the students themselves. And so I did just a quick informal survey with some of my logic students over the course of an academic year. And I have a few of the highlights of the things they said in terms of what impact this method of grading had on them, on their desire to learn, and on their motivation in the course. And while there was, there were the maybe negative kinds of feedback of, maybe they were a little confused, it felt uncomfortable not knowing where they were at, in terms of like they wanted to know, am I at a 79.8, that sort of thing that they're used to being exposed to, and being able to really, determine where they need to place, which eggs in their baskets to make the grade that they want. However, overwhelmingly, I had positive feedback. And so I wanted to highlight some of those things and also to point out some pretty profound narrative feedback that I got from my students at the end of the semester. And so I put some of these things here for you to take a look at. You're welcome to pause the video and read those. I won't read them to you, but take a look at some of that to see the kinds of things that they were reflecting on as learners, and how this, looking holistically at the learning they have demonstrated, as opposed to trying to tally up points, rack up points, piecemeal points out for all of the things that we as teachers create in order to help our students learn. So instead of sort of take out the middle person there and instead focus on the learning itself. So the quotes that I did want to really point to here is this was from a Latino student, and he was struggling in the beginning. This was a new kind of course for him, and so what he told me in the reflection here is that because we didn't have points in our class, he felt like he could actually take those risks. He could try on a test, try on a quiz. He wasn't worried about being penalized for trying. There wasn't the same sort of fear that can happen with saying, well, this one's a 6 out of 10 that you got. Instead, it's here are some of the places that I see weren't quite spot on. Let's figure out what's going on there. It's a way of redirecting, it's a way of progressing that learning instead of being distracted by, a number that can look really daunting in a traditional sense. So this student ended up finishing the semester with an A, and just seeing how, again, like he was ready to drop if this had been a points-based class because he didn't ace the first quiz, and in my perspective here, why would you? It's brand new material. Of course, there's going to be some hiccups in the beginning. So that one. This one is a little bit longer, but the idea here that not having points actually encourages even your like top A, 4.0, gotta get it students, pushes them to go even further. If they're already the type of student who's gonna do all the extra credit, who's gonna study, who's gonna make sure they're getting that A, if we use this holistic assessment, there isn't that top bar. It's you can keep going. And I think that allows for, I mean, we talk about growth mindset, but this really, opens up that idea to beyond just your 100 points or, whatever. It's learning more. It's pushing them further. And again, you can pause the video to read her comment there. But I think this is a good illustration of showing how it really does promote the learning. Lastly, just another excerpt here that I wanted to share. This one really just strikes a nerve with me, and I think speaks to the negativity of putting points into a course. And especially when we talk about points for attendance and having some pretty rigid attendance policies in terms of, bringing students down percentage levels and things like that for missing X number of days, which is probably a whole other story. But for this, I think, this was a student who was really trying her hardest, and she was a great student. But as she said there, that her A&P class had such a rigid attendance policy that after she was sick for a couple days, she knew that if she lost one more or missed one more class period, her whole grade for the class would drop by 10%, making it impossible for her to get an A. And so she decided to drop the class to wait to take it again later, simply because she was sick for a week. She was at an A, but still was worried about losing those points because of something that might be out of her control. And I think that shows that it's a deterrent to learning. It's a distraction from learning. So if nothing else, I think that this does a good job of showing that. So you can pause there to look at her comments. Okay, so that is our presentation. And if you've got questions or want to know more information about how to set your class up without points, we're happy to chat. And we also have a little, works cited bibliography page that we put together with some more argumentation in terms of ditching points and moving to holistic assessment, or at least an alternative form of that.
Yeah, and redesigning a course to be pointless or to have more meaning, I like to say, does take a lot of work and a lot of planning to figure out what the real meaningful outcomes of the course are. But so if you're interested in talking about that sort of process of designing it without points and thinking through how to assess and measure what you're really looking for, we're happy to talk and chat about that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.